Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Nonprofit Productive. I'm Mike St. Pierre, your host, and today we're going behind the scenes with a best-selling author and a best-selling book. He's Dr. Patton McDowell, and the book, which we're going to talk about today, is, I'm not just saying this, definitely one of my favorites so far in 2022. It's called Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, 7 Keys to Advancing Your Career in the Philanthropic Sector. I read a lot of books. I get sent a lot of books to review. And I'm not kidding, this one really is worth it. So we're going to talk about it today. Patton, want to just say welcome to the show and give us a sense for those who might not be familiar with you and your firm, who you are, and the origin story of this excellent book.
Mike, you're kind to offer this opportunity. Delighted to talk to you and about the book, because I was one, like many of your listeners perhaps, stumbled into the nonprofit sector. I was fortunate to have an internship out of my undergraduate days at UNC Chapel Hill. With Special Olympics International. And what started as, okay, this will be fun to be in DC for a summer, turned out to be a career-defining opportunity. Eunice Kennedy Shriver was actively leading the Special Olympics organization at the time. So I had a front row seat to fantastic, not just nonprofit leadership, but to leadership in general. And so sure enough, I stayed with Special Olympics. They hired me and I stayed with them for almost 7 years, both at the international office and came back to North Carolina to be the program director. Spent then 10 years in higher education as a fundraiser. And then 13 years ago, started the practice that we call PMA, Nonprofit Leadership. So I've been very fortunate, Mike, to work with hundreds now of nonprofit leaders. And that really is the inspiration for this book. What I have learned from so many fantastic leaders, starting with Mrs. Shriver, and then as an opportunity to work for great people myself, and then coach and consult. I wanted to bring the best of the best into hopefully a practical guide for those that are on a journey, maybe starting off like you and I did way back when. But also, and I know we'll talk about it, I think people come to the sector from different directions. So hopefully the book can provide help no matter where you are on your path.
Patton, are you able to tell, let's say you're at a cocktail event, a social function, and let's say they're all nonprofit leaders. After about an hour of chatting with folks, are you able to tell, okay, I think these two over here are really effective nonprofit leaders. These two have some more work to do. What's that like for you?
Yeah, it is. And the book is in response to maybe those two that you mentioned that are struggling. You know, I call this, well, there are 3 audiences I had in mind. One was the emerging leader. So the excited, I'm new to the sector, I feel the passion for the mission. It's like, all right, let's make sure we channel that passion into something even more effective and meaningful for you. There's the lateral entry. There's the, hey, I'm tired of the for-profit world, let me in. But will my skills transfer? And so I think that's a legitimate question. But to your dinner party question, a lot of times I run into the folks that are at that mid-career plateau. They still like the sector, but they're frustrated. They just feel stifled. They've hit a ceiling. And I run into that a lot. And of course, but what I find, some are more effective in saying, you know what, I still know where I'm going and I'm gonna find a path. Many, though, of our colleagues, I believe, though, are truly stuck. And they're like, I'm like, all right, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, I don't know, but I'm just kind of, tired of what I'm doing now, or my boss this, or my board that. And so, Mike, that's the group that I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about it. It's one thing. I don't want to be talking to you a year from now and you're still kind of frustrated or, disappointed at where your career trajectory is taking you. Those are the ones I really want to help, because I think there is a path out, but you got to do something about it,
Is that a big takeaway that you hope for the book? Just that the leader would sense, I have agency, at least some level of agency over my career?
That's such a good way to put it, indeed. But I think sadly, too many don't feel that agency. And so perhaps if there is one inspiration I hope someone could take away is, I do think you can do something about it. Now, it may not be in the organization you're in now. And I'm not trying to get you to quit your job. Well, let's explore what you can do to maybe better position yourself where you are. But yes, you may have to think about your next opportunity to have the agency that you aspire to have.
Pat, and I've heard from a number of nonprofit leaders who will express some dissatisfaction with their board. And a question I have for you, and as I was reading the book, is I'm sure that is fairly common, but is that an excuse or is that a significant reality that nonprofit leaders do have to contend with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a reality in many cases. So I don't mean to minimize the challenge of working with a volunteer group that is your boss, right? That is a unique element to the governance in the nonprofit sector, right? But I think again, you have agency to influence that as an executive director. And often when I ask this basic question, is like, all right, do your board members have a clear sense of their job description? And very often, I don't think they do. So you share some responsibility, I believe, as a leader. What did you do to help orient them or reorient them to their job? And therefore, it's not going to solve every challenging board member, but there are things I think you can do to both orient them more effectively and make sure they have somewhere to channel their volunteer energy. Because if you don't provide some guidance, they're going to give you things to do, and maybe they're not the right things to do.
I'm laughing because I have certainly experienced that.
Exactly. Me too. Me too.
Well, let's talk about the what you describe as a leadership vision statement. And as we were talking before we hit record, I found this to be very powerful because you explain what it is, and then you also give some examples of nonprofit leaders at various stages of their career. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. It struck me as a fundraiser for much of my career that we spend a lot of time articulating the case for support for the organization for which we're raising money. But then when I ask the same talented fundraiser to tell me their case for support, their personal vision statement, they're not necessarily as effective or comfortable. And so I found this vision framework based perhaps on the fundraising logic of how do you articulate clearly your case. We need to do that for ourselves. And again, agency is such a good word, Mike, for it. Take control over this vision. So what I suggest is, and we do in our mastermind program, each person develops this. And by the way, it evolves. It's not going to be perfect for the rest of your life, but I think you want to be able to articulate in a good vision statement kind of where you are, but a self-awareness that you're working on areas that you need to get better, and then clarity around the things you do know. So for example, do you know you want to stay in education as a sector, or would you consider healthcare? Would you consider arts and culture? So to me, you can start your own vision, self-awareness, if you will, with your sector. Geography is something that influences all of us. Can you move? You may not be. Your family obligations require you to stay where you are. But if you'd consider moving, all right, let's build a plan around that. What areas would you consider? And so again, the book details what I call a vision framework, and it's 6 or 7 elements that you and I've talked a little bit about. But I think if you answer each of those questions, it might provide greater clarity.
So Patton, one of the exercises that you recommend people do is take some time for a retreat, personal retreat, some time for reflection as kind of a laboratory to build that personal vision statement. Let's say somebody's watching this and they say, ooh, that seems kind of squishy. I'm not really comfortable with that idea of a retreat. What say you to that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I guess 2 things. One, I think nonprofit leaders in general don't spend enough time investing in strategic thought about their career path. They have general senses of frustration and excitement and some variation there, but they do spend a lot of time for their organization and often in retreat settings. So I would say, what is more important than your own personal strategic plan? If you're willing to invest retreats, so to speak, in your organization, let's come up with a way. And I started this about 15 years ago and found it incredibly helpful. One was simply the intentional effort to put time on the calendar and unplug and focus on these strategic questions, because it's so easy. And as a productivity expert, we can get caught in the churn of daily activity of leadership in our organization. So I applied the same principles. If you were designing a great retreat for your board or your team or your organization, why not put that same structure in an individual retreat? And that's what I did. So for example, I developed my own kind of personal pre-read agenda. I'd read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning or something to get me in a framework of long term, right? Set the tone. And then when I would get to you don't have to go. I mean, it's fun if you have an opportunity to go somewhere. It's a remote cabin or a cottage on the beach, but hey, it could be just somewhere across town. By the way, I do think it helps to get out of your office or even your home to kind of reframe. But anyway, the book outlines literally a 48-hour plan. Read some stuff in advance to get your head around it. Do some visioning exercises early, and then again you can do a assessment. So I do some of the same tools each year: vision work, assessment work, goal setting. And at first you might think, God, what would I do if I'm by myself? No, some people take a partner, and that can be good too. But I would encourage those watching and listening to think about, try it. And I'm not saying it's out and, it's not no offense, yoga retreat. If you want to do that, that's great, but I think you'll find the time goes by quickly, and hopefully I'm providing tools that could help you build an agenda accordingly.
I think so. And I think nature is a powerful aid in terms of reflection. Going for
Great
a hike,
point.
going to the ocean, it just, I don't know, it takes your breath away. It helps you think on different levels. So, no,
So
I think
true.
it's great. Patton, in the book, you use this technique of planting a concept and introducing a concept, and then following up with practical tools. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Um, is there a concept or two that you found to be especially difficult for nonprofit leaders? As an example, maybe there's a blind spot that a lot of nonprofit leaders have that you've seen over and over and over again, that with PMA, you find we really have to work on this more often than not with a lot of nonprofit leaders.
It's a great question. The 10 skills is I guess my intentionally provocative tool. It is a worksheet that suggests there are 10 essential skills or experiences I think very successful nonprofit leaders have to have. And I don't mean you have to be perfect or expert in all 10. I think you need to be competent in all 10. And so the book kind of outlines what these are. And again, as a result of being involved in a lot of search committee work and just working with really good leaders, I'm like, the best ones seem to display these things. So to answer your question, the one I think many of us up, myself included, as an early program guy, the financial acumen, the business and finance of nonprofit management and organization. And so now, of course, if someone came up on the business side, if they've worked in accounting or something like that, this may be very comfortable. But I find many of the folks I work with usually come into the field because of a programmatic passion. They're a fundraiser. They've been involved in different areas, but getting into the nuts and bolts of the finance, I call it financial acumen, that I think you need to be able to manage. So that's one. And then Mike, the other one I'd lift up is in your wheelhouse. It's productivity. As you move up the ladder, so to speak, in leadership, the volume of things you have to manage only gets more intense. And so I worry sometimes people get into that senior level and then they literally get overwhelmed. So those are two I would lift up in particular.
On the first one, financial acumen, I've certainly seen that too. And a question that I have, Patton, is let's say you've been in the nonprofit sector, I don't know, 10 years, so you're really starting to find your mojo as a nonprofit leader, and you realize I'm not great in that area, but I don't know if I want to put all my cards on the table because I think my board might see it as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
So what's your counsel for that kind of a leader who they're aware of it, but they're not exactly sure how to address it?
A couple things. One, if there's a resource within the organization. So for me, as a more junior professional, I reached out to the CFO of Special Olympics North Carolina and said, hey, could I set up a series of meetings with you and help me with some high level questions? So in other words, I didn't want to present an overwhelming request and like teach me everything. But so as a junior person, those were the most valuable. I think I took them to lunch 3 times And the CFO was wonderfully helpful because she, frankly, I think was delighted that somebody was coming into her office, not yelling at her for where's my budget, right? And you really want to know what I do? And so I said, first meeting, please let's talk to me about the revenue streams. What are the essential revenue streams to this organization? Second meeting, let's talk about the key expenses. And I don't need to know line by line, but she could help me identify, yeah, these are the levers that you need to watch if you're a leader. Mm-hmm. And then the third meeting was explain to me the fundamental reports, for example, that the board sees every meeting, or the annual report, or the 990. And so I guess my point in answering the question there is identifying a resource within the organization, being careful about the kinds of questions you have. And that was very helpful. Now, if you're a leader that you don't want to put this on the table, to your good question, I'd try to identify another executive director or a CFO of a similar organization that I could be more vulnerable, frankly, and say, all right, let me bring my budget to you. Would you be willing to take a look, walk me through some of the things I'm not clear? Because I've seen this too, Mike, where the nonprofit leader has that very intense investment banker or financial expert on their board, and they're getting pummeled with questions that they're maybe not ready for. So maybe that's kind of what you've seen too. So get outside of your organization. And something in the book I talk about is creating even a personal board of directors. And so if financial acumen is a weak spot, if you will, perhaps you need someone on your personal board. And I did this too, Mike, when I came out of college. I had a buddy who was an accounting major. And he helped me for the first 5 years of my career. And I could bring to him, hey, could you help explain this report? Or here's a question I'm getting from my board. All of this hopefully would give someone some ideas for help.
No, I love that. I mean, if you're listening and watching this on YouTube, do something. If that's an area for
don't
growth,
just hide.
Yes. Don't. Do something, right. And something's better than nothing. I enjoyed in the book when you're talking about that personal board of directors. It's not like they all need to know they're on your unofficial list, of Keith Ferrazzi, but you exactly. should be able to call upon them a couple times a year, whatever. And again, it's very empowering to know I actually have an infrastructure around me as a leader to kind of give me some feedback and maybe say some hard things. Probably mostly encouragement. So I thought that was a great point too. Pat, I want to turn to chapter 5 and curating knowledge, which is something that in my experience as a leader, I found the people who get fired, usually it's not because of incompetence, it's because they simply have stopped growing and they're not open to learning and growing and have that growth mindset. What are some practical ways that nonprofit leaders can continually be learning?
A couple things. One, be willing to self-assess on a regular annual basis. So the 10 skills you and I were just discussing, to me, you can always get better. We never arrive, to your point, as a nonprofit leader. So which of the 10 skills or experiences can you work on, which then could lead to an opportunity to curate more knowledge? If financial acumen is a challenge, all right, I know what I need to work on this year. If strategic planning, or maybe it's advocacy and government relations, or there's always programmatic elements in your sector that you can look to get better at and learn more about. So self-assessment is section 1, I guess, of that answer. Also, the best way for me to keep on the cutting edge is identify aspirational leaders in my field. Who is the best in your field at your job? And so, for example, when I got to Special Olympics, I was a program director. I wanted to know who the best program directors in the United States were. And it didn't take long, in kind of informal conversations or at the conference. Every sector has a conference, right? Your state conference, your national conference. And sure enough, they would say, oh, yeah, it's Louise out in Colorado, or it's Steve up in Maine. The veterans, they're really good. I reached out to them. And it by developing a relationship and asking them the question, all right, what do you think's next on the horizon for our field? To me, it constantly kept me on the cutting edge as well. And to your point, motivated to stay up there. You know, I want to run with the lead pack. And so for those nonprofit leaders, and sadly, the coronavirus has kept us more isolated, but identify those aspirational leaders in your field, stay connected. I would always try to keep 2 of them on my personal board because I knew they would push me. Right. And so that's how I would, I guess, respond to that really good point.
And it doesn't have to be an elaborate process. You know, if you're using something like Todoist or OmniFocus, these are tools that can remind you to ping that particular person and reach out to them in 3 months. You know, you don't need some fancy CRM for your personal network. You just need a system that's simple enough, and just make sure you're in touch with those aspirational leaders, which is a beautiful phrase.
Yeah, we talk about in our mastermind, Mike, this 2 a month, right?
Right.
2 a month, reach out to somebody, and it keeps you, as you said, with the different tools we have. That becomes 24 significant contacts a year. Who knows where that might lead?
Exactly. I definitely want to reference folks to chapter 9 of the book, which kind of gives a nice, I think, overhead view of these 7 elements or stops along the way. It's so helpful, but people should not jump right to chapter 9. They should really read the whole book. So kudos to that. Patton, I'm so grateful for your time and for your wisdom, your humility, and your expertise. Your firm is obviously doing some great work, and I think this book is just going to be another satellite to the work of PMA. How can folks find out more about you, about the firm, and about the book?
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Glad we are connected and can share resources. But find me on LinkedIn. Patton McDowell on LinkedIn is where I am active. Our firm is pattonmcdowell.com. We use the kind of title of PMA nonprofit leadership. The website is pattonmcdowell.com, myname.com. And that's where you can find out more about the book, about our consulting. And the book leads to, for those that really want to deep dive in the principles of the book, we have a mastermind program, which is a virtual opportunity to engage on all 7 of these steps with a dynamic group of fellow nonprofit leaders. And because it's virtual, of course, we benefited from leaders from all over the country, someday maybe all over the world, but that's certainly where you can find pattonmcdowell.com.
And we'll make sure we put it in the show notes. Patton, thank you so much. We're grateful for your time.
Mike, likewise. Thank you.